Between Christmas and Epiphany, the human soul enters a region of time that is unlike any other in the yearly cycle. According to Rudolf Steiner, this period cannot be understood merely as a continuation of the calendar year, but must be approached as a threshold in which earthly and cosmic rhythms interpenetrate in a particularly intimate way. Outwardly, nature appears to rest. Vegetation withdraws, animal life becomes quieter, and the earth seems to turn inward. Inwardly, however, a profound activity unfolds, one that largely bypasses ordinary waking consciousness and works instead in the deeper layers of the soul and the etheric life forces. Steiner describes the Christmas moment as the point at which the earth most fully receives the forces of the cosmos into its interior. The sun, whose outer light and warmth have receded to their minimum, now works most intensely in the hidden, formative forces of the earth. This cosmic reversal is mirrored in the human being. What during the summer months is directed outward, attention, perception, activity, is now gently guided inward. The soul becomes more receptive, not through effort, but through the natural rhythm of the year. Between Christmas and Epiphany, the human being lives often unconsciously, in closer proximity to the spiritual world than at any other time. Steiner emphasizes that during the 12 holy nights, the boundary between the sensory world and the supersensible world becomes more permeable. This does not mean that modern human beings suddenly regain ancient clairvoyance. Rather, the spiritual world works more deeply into the unconscious and subconscious layers of the soul. Images, moods, dreams, and subtle inner experiences arise not as random phenomena, but as expressions of a lawful spiritual activity. The soul is, as it were, gently lifted out of its habitual orientation toward the outer world and placed into a wider cosmic context. In earlier epochs of human evolution, such periods were consciously experienced and ritually protected. Humanity knew that the time between Christmas and Epiphany was not suited for ordinary activity alone, but required reverence, restraint, and inwardness. Steiner points out that what was once guarded by instinct and tradition must now be approached with conscious understanding. Even if modern life does not allow outward withdrawal, the soul still participates inwardly in this hidden work. Whether one is aware of it or not, the forces shaping destiny, memory, and future intention are quietly active. Central to this period is the relationship between the human soul and time itself. Steiner describes how, during the 12 nights, the soul loosens its tight binding to linear physical time. Past experiences, present impressions, and future tendencies interweave in a fluid manner. It is not without reason that this time has long been associated with destiny, foresight, and karmic preparation. The soul reviews, not intellectually, but imaginally, the forces that have shaped it and those that seek to shape it in the year to come. This review does not take place as conscious judgment, but as a living weaving of inner pictures and moods that later influence decisions, encounters, and life events. What is especially significant is that this work of the soul does not arise from personal will. It is carried by higher spiritual beings who are closely connected with the evolution of humanity. Steiner speaks of the cooperation of human souls with the hierarchies during this time, particularly with those beings who guide the rhythms of the year and the moral development of mankind. The human being is not a passive recipient, but neither is he the active director. The task is one of receptivity, of allowing the soul to be worked upon without disturbance. Thus, the period between Christmas and Epiphany can be understood as a time in which the foundations for the coming year are laid not externally, but inwardly. The quality of quietude, reverence, and moral attentiveness cultivated during this time does not immediately reveal its effects. Yet, as Steiner emphasizes, what is received in these nights lives on, shaping the unfolding biography of the individual and contributing, in subtle ways, to the future evolution of humanity itself. As the soul passes through the days following Christmas, it enters a condition that Steiner characterizes as one of heightened inward plasticity. The usual firmness of waking consciousness loosens, and the soul becomes more malleable to formative influences that do not originate in the physical world. In this state, impressions are not primarily taken in through the senses, but through the etheric body, which during this time is more open to cosmic rhythms than at any other point in the year. The human being is, in a subtle sense, living more strongly in the life forces of the earth itself. Steiner draws attention to the fact that the etheric body is especially active during this period. While the physical body rests more deeply and the astral body withdraws somewhat from its usual engagement with the outer world, the etheric body becomes a bearer of memory, destiny, and future orientation. It is through the etheric body that the experiences of the past year are not merely remembered, but transformed. Events that in waking life appeared fragmented or unresolved are inwardly reordered. The soul does not analyze them. Rather, they are woven into a larger pattern that relates to the individual's karmic path. This is why Steiner speaks of the 12 holy nights as a time in which the human being stands closer to the spiritual archetypes of his own biography. The soul is momentarily freed from the pressure of immediate reaction and can be shaped by forces that have a longer view than the conscious intellect. One might say that during this time, the future is gently impressed into the soul, not as fixed fate, but as potential. What later appears as intuition, impulse, or moral insight often has its seed in these quiet days. Steiner also emphasizes that the forces working during this time are closely connected with the Christ impulse. Christmas marks the moment when the Christ force unites itself most deeply with the earth. This is not a symbolic statement, but a spiritual reality. The Christ works as a living presence within the etheric and moral atmosphere of the earth. Between Christmas and Epiphany, the human soul can come into a more intimate relationship with this presence, not through emotional exaltation, but through quiet attunement. The Christ does not impose himself. He works in freedom, shaping only what the human being allows to be shaped. In this sense, the hidden work of the soul during these days is also a moral preparation. Steiner makes clear that morality is not something added to human nature from outside. It arises from the deep harmonization of thinking, feeling, and willing. During the 12 nights, these three soul forces are subtly rebalanced. Thinking becomes less rigid, feeling less reactive, willing less impulsive. The soul is prepared to meet the coming year not merely with habit, but with renewed inner orientation. Epiphany then appears as a threshold. What has been prepared inwardly seeks to reveal itself in consciousness. Steiner describes Epiphany as the moment of manifestation, when the soul again turns outward, but now carrying within it what has been quietly formed. The danger of modern life, however, is that this transition passes unnoticed. Without conscious attention, the soul's work remains unconscious, and its fruits are weakened. Steiner therefore urges a conscious reverence for this period, not as superstition, but as a recognition of spiritual lawfulness. Thus, the days between Christmas and Epiphany form a bridge between what has been and what is to come. They are not meant to be filled with outward resolutions or intellectual plans, but with inner listening. In this listening, the soul learns to trust that its deepest guidance does not arise from restless activity, but from a living relationship with the spiritual world that works quietly, faithfully, and lawfully within the rhythms of time itself. As the 12 holy nights unfold, Steiner indicates that the soul does not merely receive impressions from the spiritual world, but is gradually reoriented in its relationship to the whole cosmos. During ordinary waking life, the human being experiences himself as a center surrounded by a world of objects. In the Christmas Epiphany period, this polarity softens. The soul is, for a time, less sharply enclosed within the physical body and more extended into the etheric sphere of the earth. This is why moods, dreams, and inner images during these nights often carry a cosmic rather than purely personal character. One may feel connected to distant events, to other human beings, or to questions of destiny that seem larger than one's individual biography. Steiner explains that this expansion of the soul is connected with the activity of spiritual beings who guide the evolution of humanity. The hierarchies work more directly upon the etheric body during this period, shaping forces that later appear as moral impulses, capacities for understanding, and readiness for encounter. What is especially significant is that this work respects human freedom. The spiritual world does not dictate content. It prepares organs of perception and strength. Whether these forces later become fruitful depends on the consciousness and ethical striving of the individual. In earlier times, the human being experienced this guidance more instinctively. Today, Steiner emphasizes the task is different. Modern humanity must learn to approach such periods with inner wakefulness rather than passive receptivity alone. This does not mean forcing experiences or seeking extraordinary states, but cultivating an attitude of inner quiet that allows the soul to recognize what is being prepared within it. The danger of the present age lies in filling this sacred interval with distraction, noise, and constant outward engagement. When the soul is never allowed to fall silent, the subtle formative forces cannot fully unfold. Steiner also points out that during these nights the soul stands in a special relationship to memory and destiny. The past year does not merely recede, it is transformed. Experiences that were painful or unresolved are inwardly worked upon, not to erase them, but to integrate them into the deeper meaning of one's life path. At the same time, impulses related to future encounters and challenges are gently seeded. This is why, later in the year, certain meetings or decisions can feel strangely prepared, as though they arise from a deeper necessity rather than from chance. Their roots often lie in this hidden seasonal work. A particularly delicate aspect of this period concerns the moral quality of the soul. Steiner emphasizes that the spiritual beings working during the 12 nights are especially responsive to the ethical orientation of the human being. Not moral perfection, but sincerity, truthfulness, and a genuine striving toward goodness create a resonance with these forces. Even small inner gestures, gratitude, forgiveness, reverence, have an intensified effect during this time. They do not immediately alter outer circumstances, but they shape the inner instrument through which destiny later speaks. As the days approach Epiphany, the soul gradually returns toward a more outward orientation, yet it does so changed. Something has been impressed into its depths that cannot be fully articulated. Steiner suggests that the task of the human being after Epiphany is not to analyze this change, but to live into it. The impressions received seek expression in deeds, in renewed clarity of thought, and in a strengthened sense of responsibility toward the world. If the Christmas period is the time of receiving, the time after Epiphany is the time of conscious realization. Thus, the hidden work of the soul between Christmas and Epiphany reveals itself as a central moment in the yearly rhythm of spiritual life. It is a time when the human being is inwardly addressed by the spiritual world, not through commands or revelations, but through quiet, formative forces that prepare freedom. To recognize this work is to acknowledge that human development does not proceed solely through outward effort, but through a living dialogue with the rhythms of the cosmos that continue to shape the destiny of humanity in silence. When Epiphany arrives, Steiner describes it as a moment of gentle awakening rather than sudden illumination. The soul does not step back into ordinary consciousness unchanged. It carries within it the imprint of what has transpired invisibly. Epiphany is the point at which the inner work of the 12 holy nights seeks expression in waking life. What was shaped in silence now presses toward manifestation, not as visions or extraordinary experiences, but as a subtle shift in orientation toward the world. The human being may feel a renewed clarity, a quiet resolve, or an inner firmness that was not consciously achieved, yet is undeniably present. Steiner emphasizes that this transition places a responsibility upon the individual. The spiritual world has worked lawfully and generously, but it is now up to the human eye to take hold of what has been given. If the soul immediately submerges itself again in distraction, routine, and unreflected activity, the impressions of this sacred time fade into the unconscious. They do not disappear, but they lose the possibility of conscious transformation. Epiphany therefore calls not for emotional exaltation, but for attentiveness to one's own inner life and its quiet intentions. A central aspect of Epiphany is the renewed relationship between the human being and the Christ impulse. Steiner explains that Christ's work, since the mystery of Golgotha, unfolds increasingly in the etheric realm and in the moral atmosphere of humanity. During the Christmas period, the soul is prepared to receive this impulse more deeply. At Epiphany, the possibility arises to recognize it in conscious thought and ethical action. This recognition does not take the form of doctrinal certainty, but of a strengthened capacity to act out of truth and compassion. Christ is found where the human being resolves to unite clarity of thinking with warmth of heart and strength of will. Steiner also points out that Epiphany marks a renewed descent of the soul into earthly tasks. The inwardness of the Christmas period must not become withdrawal from the world. Rather, it should become the source of a more responsible engagement with it. What has been received inwardly now seeks embodiment in relationships, work, and social life. In this sense, Epiphany is a festival of incarnation, not of a divine being alone, but of the human capacity to carry spiritual insight into concrete reality. The hidden work of the soul between Christmas and Epiphany thus reveals its full meaning only when viewed in its entirety. Christmas signifies the deepest inward turning of the soul. The 12 holy nights are the time of spiritual formation beyond ordinary consciousness. Epiphany is the threshold of return, where the fruits of this formation can enter waking life. This rhythm reflects a fundamental law of human development. True renewal does not arise from constant activity, but from alternation between receptivity and action, silence and expression. In Steiner's view, this yearly rhythm is not a relic of religious tradition, but a living spiritual reality that continues to shape humanity's future. As modern human beings increasingly lose instinctive connections to cosmic rhythms, the task arises to rediscover them consciously. To live with awareness of the hidden work of the soul during this sacred time is to align oneself with forces that support freedom, moral strength, and spiritual clarity. It is an acknowledgement that the human being is not only a product of social and biological conditions, but a participant in a meaningful cosmic process that unfolds in time, season, and inner life. Thus, the period between Christmas and Epiphany stands as a quiet yet decisive turning point each year, a time when the soul is addressed by the spiritual world and prepared for renewed participation in earthly existence. To honor this time inwardly is to allow one's life to be shaped not only by external circumstances, but by the deeper currents of spiritual reality that continue patiently and faithfully to work within the human soul.